The jungle was silent that morning, but silence in the wild never means peace. It means something is watching. I could feel the earth move beneath my feet, a slow, heavy tremble that carried the memory of blood. My herd was gone, taken by those who came with fire and hunger in their eyes. They didn't come to survive. They came to conquer. I remember their faces, their scent, the sound of laughter when the first fell, the second screamed, and the rest ran. They thought I was broken, a beast with nothing left to fight for, but they were wrong. They didn't know that pain can carve power deeper than any wound. My tusks weren't just ivory anymore. They were my revenge, my weapon, my will. That day, the hunter became the hunted, and the jungle remembered the name of the one they tried to destroy but couldn't. My name is Arkin, born in an age when the earth was wild and the sky carried the roar of beasts unknown to time. I came into a world where survival was not given, it was earned through blood and bone. The air burned with dust, and the wind whispered warnings of predators that hunted not for hunger, but for dominance. Every sunrise felt like a challenge, a question of whether I would see another. I was not the largest among my kind, but my tusks gleamed brighter than moonlight, drawing both awe and envy. They called it beauty, but I learned it was a curse. The day I watched my herd fall, the day the ground drank their cries, something inside me changed. I swore no creature would ever take from me again. My ivory, once a symbol of pride, would become the sharp edge of my vengeance. The night the hunters came, the air turned heavy, and even the stars hid behind clouds as if the sky itself refused to witness what was about to happen. I remember the sound first, not loud, but sharp and deliberate, a rhythm too controlled to belong to nature. The ground quivered beneath their steps, each one echoing with the greed that brought them here. I watched from the shadows, my breath low, my heart steady yet burning with a fear I could taste. They moved in packs, whispering in a language I didn't understand, but I could feel the hunger in their voices. They didn't come to kill for food or defend their ground. They came for what gleamed on my face, the ivory that had once defined my pride. My name, Arkin, no longer belonged to the wild. It was now a target marked by their desire. I had seen death before, but never like this. The air smelled of oil and smoke, and the gleam of their tools caught the moonlight like the fangs of predators made by man. The first blow came suddenly, a strike not of pain but of shock, cutting through the silence that had held the jungle hostage. My instincts screamed to run, but the rage within me kept me still, forcing my eyes to watch as they circled closer. Each step they took crushed the bones of the earth, and I could feel the memories of my fallen herd calling out to me, urging me to survive. I turned and charged through the trees, the ground shaking with my weight, but they followed, swift, organized, relentless. Fire exploded behind me as one of their weapons screamed through the dark, tearing apart the branches that once protected me. I could feel the sting of heat against my skin and the metallic scent of blood rising in the wind. My strength was my gift, but their cunning was their weapon. They knew how to trap giants, how to break the will of something meant to be unbreakable. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs trembled, but their lights never faded. I could hear their laughter cutting through the night, mocking the fear they thought they owned. But inside me, something darker than fear began to rise, something that had slept since the day my herd was slaughtered. I remembered their faces falling, their cries fading, the silence that followed. I remembered the promise I made to never let my kind die in vain. When I turned to face them again, I was no longer running. I was waiting. They raised their weapons, their eyes shining with victory, but they had mistaken retreat for weakness. I lowered my head, feeling the strength pulse through my veins. Every muscle coiled like a storm. When they stepped forward, I charged, the ground cracking beneath me, their shouts turning into screams. The first fell before he could aim, his fire dying in his hands. The others stumbled back, shock freezing their courage. I felt the impact of their blows, but pain no longer mattered. Every strike they made only fed the fury burning inside me. I was not fighting to live. I was fighting to avenge. My tusks tore through the air like lightning, not as ornaments of beauty, but as weapons of justice. The jungle erupted with chaos, the crash of trees, the roar of vengeance, the cries of those who once thought themselves invincible. And in that moment, I understood something that changed everything. The ivory they sought to steal was never my weakness. It was my power, carved by time and sharpened by loss. The same tusks they craved for their greed had become the reason I would survive. As dawn began to rise, its light fell upon a scene painted in silence. The hunters were gone, their fire extinguished, their weapons scattered like bones. I stood alone once again, the jungle breathing slowly, as if awakening from a nightmare. I could still feel the blood on my skin, warm and real, reminding me that survival always demands a price. But this time, I was no longer just a creature running from danger. I had become the danger itself. The hunters had arrived to claim my ivory, but they left behind their fear, etched into the soil they once walked on with pride. From that day forward, every sound in the jungle carried a warning, the echo of my steps, the whisper of my name. Archon, the one they could not break, the beast whose tusks turned from symbols of beauty into blades of vengeance. The world around me would continue to change, seasons would rise and fall, and hunters would return with new faces and stronger weapons. But what they would never understand is that ivory may shine, but its true power lies in the spirit that bears it. That night, beneath the fading moon, I learned that survival is not about escaping death. It is about transforming pain into power. And as I disappeared into the mist of dawn, I knew that the story of Ivory had only just begun, and its legacy would outlive even the memory of those who once dared to hunt me. Days turned into nights and nights into whispers of vengeance that refused to fade. And as the jungle healed its wounds, I carried mine like a crown carved from pain and fire. I could still feel the echo of their laughter in the wind, the sound of their boots crushing the soil where my family once stood, and each memory burned deeper into my heart until mercy no longer had a place within me. I watched from afar as the hunters returned, their torches glowing like false stars against the dark sky, their camp alive with arrogance, unaware that the prey they once chased was now watching from the shadows with eyes no longer filled with fear but purpose. The scars across my body had hardened like armor, each mark reminding me of the night I almost lost everything. My tusks, once gleaming symbols of beauty, had grown thicker, sharper, deadlier. They were no longer decorations of life. They were instruments of justice. I waited for the wind to shift, for the smoke from their fire to blur their sight, for the moon to hide behind clouds. When the moment came, silence fell like a blade, and I stepped into the clearing. The air trembled as I moved, every step measured, every breath steady, the ground responding to the rage that slept beneath it. The first hunter noticed too late, his shout drowned by the roar that tore from my chest, a sound that carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken cries. I struck without hesitation, the force of my tusks shattering the wooden walls of their camp like fragile bones. Panic spread through them, torches falling, shadows running, but there was nowhere left to hide. The jungle that once sheltered them now turned against them, trees swaying as if alive, leaves whispering my name. One by one they tried to fight back, their fire flashing, their weapons screaming, but every blow they delivered met the storm they had created. The ground shook with each charge, their cries blending with the wind, until all that remained was the rhythm of my heartbeat and the crackle of burning wood. I moved like a ghost through their chaos, unstoppable, untamed, and for the first time, I saw fear in the eyes of the hunters. The same men who had once hunted me now ran, stumbling through the darkness, their courage stripped away by the very creature they had called beast. My ivory tore through their walls, their tents, their pride, leaving behind only silence. I was no longer running from them. I was erasing their presence from the land they had poisoned. But amidst the fury, something strange stirred within me, a shadow of sorrow for what I had become. Vengeance had filled the emptiness inside me, yet it tasted like ash. I stood among the ruins of their camp, their fires dying, the scent of smoke thick in the air, and I realized the truth that cut deeper than any wound. The hunters had fallen, but their kind would return. My victory was only a moment in the endless war between greed and survival. Still, that night belonged to me. The jungle itself seemed to breathe in rhythm with my triumph, every rustle of leaves echoing my defiance. The river nearby reflected the glow of the fading flames, and in it, I saw myself not the frightened creature that once ran but the guardian I was meant to be. The ivory they craved had become my shield, my weapon, my voice. Each scar upon me told a story of loss, and each strike I delivered wrote a new one of strength. I turned from the destruction and walked toward the heart of the forest, where the spirits of my herd slept beneath the soil. The air felt lighter there, softer, as if they were watching, and for a moment I could almost feel their warmth again. I bowed my head, not in sadness but in promise. The cycle of blood would not end here, but neither would our legacy. I had turned their greed into their downfall, their desire into their defeat. The jungle had taken back its throne, and I had become its weapon of balance. As the first light of dawn touched the trees, the mist rose, wrapping around me like a cloak of memory. My body ached. My tusks carried the weight of battle, yet my heart felt still for the first time in years. I understood then that power was never in the ivory itself, but in the spirit that refused to break. And though I had won the night, I knew my story would live on in the whispers of the wind, in the trembling of the earth, in the quiet fear of every hunter who dared to step into this land again. For they would always remember the name Arkan, the creature they hunted, the force they awakened, the survivor who turned ivory into power. Centuries slipped away like fading echoes, and the jungle that once trembled beneath my feet began to change, its shadows softer, its silence deeper. Yet the memory of that night never left the roots of the earth. I became a whisper, a ghost of an age long buried beneath dust and time. But even as the seasons turned, and my bones sank into the soil, my story refused to die. The wind carried it, reshaping it through generations, until it reached those who would one day walk upright and call themselves rulers of the world. They came not with fire or fear, but with desire disguised as admiration. They looked upon the remains of creatures like me, and saw not the story of survival, but the sparkle of ivory. They touched the tusks once born of strength and loss, and in their hands, beauty turned to greed. My victory had ended the hunters of my time, but their hunger survived them, passed from father to son, from dream to obsession. until the purpose of life itself was forgotten. Ivory no longer belonged to the wild. It became a treasure, carved and sold, celebrated and stolen. Where once it had been my weapon, now it was their curse. I watched from the quiet of memory as men sailed across oceans, crossed deserts, and cut through forests, searching for what should have been left buried. They built kingdoms on the bones of those like me, their walls lined with the very ivory that had once saved my life. Every polished piece carried the echo of pain, every sculpture a silent cry frozen in beauty. They told stories of power, of art, of value, never realizing that what they called art was born from agony. I saw their hands bleed, not from the hunt, but from the weight of what they created. The curse was spreading, quiet but unstoppable. What began as survival had turned into destruction, and their greed became the new predator. The jungles shrank, the rivers grew silent, and the cries of the wild faded into memory. Yet still they came, their eyes filled not with fear, but hunger. The same hunger that once destroyed my herd, now consuming their own kind. The power of ivory twisted their hearts, turned kings into thieves, and innocence into cruelty. They thought they owned the earth, but they were only burying themselves beneath it, one tusk at a time. And as I watched their empires rise and crumble, I understood the cruel irony of time. The weapon that had given me life had become the reason for their suffering. My tusks had saved me, but theirs destroyed them. Generations passed, and the hunters forgot the jungle's voice, forgot the warning whispered through leaves and wind. They wore ivory around their necks, carved it into gods, traded it for gold, never knowing that every piece carried a shadow of the wild they had silenced. The curse of greed spread further than I ever imagined, until even their children were born into a world that no longer remembered what it meant to live without taking. I felt the pain of the earth grow heavier, the air turning thick with smoke and sorrow. The same story repeated itself, only this time, there were no beasts left to fight back. The jungle had fallen quiet again, too quiet, just like it was the morning before everything began. History had folded in on itself, and once more, the hunters became the hunted not by claws or tusks, but by the very emptiness they had created. And in that silence, I realized that time had played its final trick. My story, born from blood and survival, had become their mirror. They had taken my ivory to show their power, but in doing so, they exposed their weakness. They had turned strength into sin, life into luxury, and now, they were trapped in a world built on the bones of their own greed. I am no longer here, yet my legacy breathes in every corner of the earth, in every reminder of what they lost. They thought they conquered the wild, but the wild was never meant to be conquered. It only waits, patient and timeless. And somewhere deep within the soil where my body once rested, my spirit still listens. It hears the faint footsteps of those who dig for what remains, unaware that they are unearthing their own end. For the legacy of ivory is not beauty, not wealth, not triumph. It is a reflection of truth that time refuses to bury. What they sought to possess has possessed them instead, and as their world begins to crumble under its own weight, I remain eternal, not in form but in memory, a warning carved into history itself. And now, as the wind moves through the forgotten trees and the rivers whisper my name, I know my time has long passed, yet my story still breathes beneath every root and stone. The world has changed, but the echoes remain, carrying the truth of what was lost and what was never learned. Ivory was never a jewel. It was a wound carved into time, a reminder that beauty born from pain will always demand its price. I do not seek pity, nor do I offer forgiveness. The hunters became the hunted, their greed swallowed by the silence they created. Justice did not come from war, but from remembrance, for every fallen life becomes part of the earth's eternal voice. So when they look upon ivory and see only beauty, let them remember my eyes in the dark, the strength in my silence, and the cost of what they chose to desire.